What does it take for you to trust someone? Do you need to know that person? If so, for how long? Most of our relationships are built in trust. We trust our parents. We trust our spouses. We trust our kids. We trust our friends. We trust that they will not hurt us because of our firm belief and reliability and truth in their past actions. When we're a member of a team, we trust those around us because we all have the same goal in mind. But you know, trust doesn't come naturally to us. Normally, trust has to be earned, and building trust takes time. But I think we can shorten that time of building trust by getting recommendations from those we know, folks that we already have a relationship, our family, a friend, or a colleague, those people who we already trust. This relying on others for advice plays an important part in our lives because we already have a fair amount of blind trust in our everyday life. Think about it. For example, we trust the food that we buy that has been prepared properly and stored correctly so that we won't get sick from eating it. We've all had that experience where someone we knew had a bad experience at a restaurant, and it played a part in our decision of whether or not we would eat there. We trust in our doctor's knowledge that they will give us the right medication and the treatment to get better. We trust our auto mechanics to make sure that they've made the repairs correctly on our cars. We put a lot of trust into people that we may not have a close relationship with, or we may have never have met before. Putting trust in someone who we haven't met plays a big part in today's Old Testament story. Our story starts with us meeting Naaman. Naaman was a mighty warrior and a great general. He was, as we would say, a big shot in the area. He was a great man, but he also had one big flaw. He had a skin disease. He had leprosy. And being a leper socially isolated Naaman. Now, in one of Naaman's past conquests, he brought home a little Israelite slave girl for his wife. This was typical in the culture at the time, and we don't know the name of the girl or how long she served as a slave to his wife. At one point, though, the girl told Naaman's wife that her people had a prophet that could cure his leprosy. This news intrigues Naaman, and he goes to his king, and since the king likes him so much, he endangers a fragile truce with Israel so that Naaman might seek healing. Now, being a very successful warrior, Naaman had great wealth. So he brings with him 1,000 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and multiple suits of clothing. It was a huge treasure. And he also travels in style, with an entourage around him, consisting of horses and chariots. All of this would have been seen as a great possession of power. Now, when Naaman gets to the king was not able to help him. But his prophet Elijah might be able to cure him. You guys remember Elisha. We read about him in last week's text, and how he received his power from God, and he succeeded the prophet Elijah. So Elisha hears about Naaman's problems and sends for him. So Naaman rolls up in front of Elijah's house that afternoon, the horses tossing their heads, the chariots gleaming, with boxes and boxes of gold and silver, all ready to buy a cure for his leprosy. Now Naaman, being the great leader that he was was accustomed to people bowing down to honor him. He was also accustomed to unquestioning obedience from everyone upon his arrival. So if there was a prophet in Israel power enough to heal him, Naaman knew for sure that he would be healed. He had expected it. But did that happen? No, at least not right away. Elisha dishonors the great man at his door. He doesn't even come down to meet him. Instead, he sends a messenger to give him instruction. This confuses Naaman and makes him mad. Naaman was expecting somewhat of a show, that the prophet would come down and say some fancy words, and he would call on the name of his Lord and wave his hands and cure the disease. But despite what Naaman was expecting, there was no special rite of healing, and the prophet didn't even come to meet with him at all. The message for Naaman was a simple one. Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times. Elisha sends Naaman off with what Naaman believes to be a self-serve, third-rate cure. Washing himself in the Jordan. Totally outrageous. Furious, Naaman slams the chariot door and drives off. Perhaps it was only Naaman's desperate cure that kept him from burning down the prophet Elijah's house. But he stops, and again he trusts in his servants, and that saves him. They convince him that what would it hurt to try washing in the Jordan River as Elisha told him. Naaman thinks about it and then treks down the long, steep road to the Jordan. Now we say the Jordan River, but it's not much of a river. It's much closer to a stream, and it's much less glorious by human standards than the rivers in Damascus where Naaman was from. Having to wash in this little stream was part of Naaman's humiliation. So while his whole entourage watches, Naaman dips himself into the humble Jordan River 7 times. The 7 times of immersion recalls the priestly rituals of the cleansings that's specified in Leviticus. On the 7th dip into the river, Naaman is made clean. His skin is like that of a young boy's. His story continues in the rest of the chapter, and I encourage you to read along. It's very interesting. But there were 3 turning points in Naaman's level of trust in today's story. First was his trust in the servant's girl's suggestion that he go to see the prophet in her land. The second level of trust was the trust that he had in those that he traveled with to go down to the river. And Naaman's last level of trust was trusting in a God that he could not see, that by washing 7 times that God would heal him of his leprosy. In the same way that Naaman grew in his faith and trusted in the instructions that Elisha gave him, we are called to trust and to grow in our faith in Jesus Christ. This same Jesus who came from the Father to be among us so that the world may be healed. Our love for Jesus is to fully trust in a God in all that we do. You know, I think it really boils down to the idea that to love is to trust. To love is to trust. We are called to love God, and by our love, we trust God. And with that in mind, if we know that God loves us, does that mean that God trusts us? And if God trusts us, what are we trusted with? God trusts us with taking care of all of creation. We are trusted with taking care of the environment, the plants, the animals, the lakes, the streams, the rivers, the seas. And most importantly, God trusts us to take care of each other. But I wonder what God thinks about how we are doing, taking care of such a beautiful creation and all of His creatures and each other. Are we letting God down by the way we treat the nature that surrounds us? Are we letting God down by not taking care of each other? Are we letting God down by not trusting each other? Are we letting God down by not loving each other like God loves us? Thank goodness that we serve and worship a loving and forgiving God. For when we do let God down, God still loves us. Always has, always will. Friends, let's not let God down. Let's strive to trust and to love each other, just like God has loved us. And God's people said, amen. Please stand as you feel comfortable.